Richard had always believed that moving into the Willow Creek subdivision would be the beginning of a new chapter in his life, a safe haven where his daughter Emily could grow up without fear. But little did he know that behind the manicured lawns and white fences lurked a monster who wore pearls and carried a clipboard, a woman named Margaret, though everyone whispered Karen under their breath whenever she strutted through the cul-de-sac with her self-righteous smirk and sharp tongue. The kind of neighbor who measured grass with a ruler and snapped pictures of garbage cans left out 2 minutes too long. Richard, being a lawyer, thought he could handle people like her with calm reason and airtight arguments, but he wasn't prepared for the venom she carried in her heart, especially toward Emily, his 10-year-old daughter, who had been born with cerebral palsy and required a wheelchair to move around, her fragile body, often a target for cruel stares and pity, but never outright hatred, at least until Margaret set her eyes on her. It all started subtly, the way these things always do, with passive-aggressive comments at HOA meetings like, perhaps certain families should consider whether this community is really suited for special needs, and icy smiles when Richard rolled Emily down the sidewalk. But soon the whispers grew sharper and the glances turned to glares, though Richard tried to dismiss them as the usual suburban gossip, the petty politics of people with too much time on their hands. Yet deep down he felt a chill every time Margaret's eyes lingered on Emily as though she were a stain on the perfect picture of their neighborhood. There were moments when Emily, innocent and pure-hearted, would ask him, "Daddy, why does Mrs. Margaret look at me like that?" And Richard, forcing a smile, would say, "She's just unhappy with her own life, sweetheart, nothing to do with you." Though inside his stomach knotted because he knew hatred when he saw it, and Margaret's hatred was simmering, waiting for an excuse to boil over. Then came the small incidents, like the morning when Emily's wheelchair left a faint track on the freshly poured sidewalk chalk her neighbor's kids had been drawing, and Margaret stormed across the lawn shrieking, "Control your child. She's ruining the children's art." As if Emily, who had simply smiled at the colorful drawings, was some kind of vandal. Richard bit his tongue that day, wheeling Emily back home. But inside he burned with rage because he had seen the way Margaret's eyes gleamed, not with annoyance, but with something darker, a hunger to humiliate and crush. Still, he told himself he was overthinking it, that perhaps it was just neighborhood friction, but fate was already winding the spring tighter, setting the stage for something far more sinister. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the street lamps flickered on, Richard heard raised voices outside and stepped onto his porch to find Margaret arguing with an elderly neighbor about a lawn ornament, her voice shrill, cutting through the air like a knife, and for a moment her gaze drifted to Emily, who sat beside him in her wheelchair, holding her stuffed rabbit, and Richard swore he saw Margaret's lips curl into a smile, not the polite, forced smile of HOA politics, but the smile of a predator who had found her prey. That night, Richard lay awake replaying it in his mind, telling himself he was being paranoid. Yet when Emily had trouble sleeping and climbed into his bed whispering, "Daddy, I'm scared of her," he knew his instincts weren't wrong. The unease grew heavier when at the next HOA meeting, Margaret slammed her papers on the table and began ranting about unsightly wheelchairs left outside and liabilities on the community sidewalks. Her voice rising as several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unwilling to speak up but too cowardly to stop her, and Richard sat there gripping his pen, so hard his knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to leap across the table. But instead he cleared his throat and said in his calm lawyer's voice, "My daughter has the same right to live here as anyone else, and I will not tolerate discrimination." And though the room went silent for a beat, Margaret's glare burned into him, and he knew in that instant that she would not let it go, that she would escalate until she got what she wanted. Walking home from that meeting under the dim glow of the streetlights, Richard felt a heaviness pressing down on him, an unshakable dread he couldn't rationalize away. And when Emily squeezed his hand and said, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" he forced a reassuring smile, but his heart screamed yes, because he had seen Margaret's eyes, and they were the eyes of someone who wasn't just annoyed or bitter, but dangerous, and though he didn't know when or how, he knew she was planning something, and that something would shatter their lives. Daniel had always considered himself a patient man, someone who could endure the slings and arrows of daily life without letting anger consume him, but Patricia, The neighbor everyone had quietly nicknamed the HOA Queen was testing limits he never thought he had, and her obsession with controlling everything around her was beginning to circle tighter and tighter around his daughter Sophia, whose fragile frame and wheelchair made her an easy target for someone looking to bully without consequence. The first serious incident came on a warm Saturday morning when Sophia begged her father to take her down to the little park at the end of the cul-de-sac, a simple outing Daniel always cherished because he loved watching the joy in her eyes as she listened to the birds and felt the sunlight on her cheeks. Yet, as he wheeled her down the sidewalk, Patricia appeared on her porch in her pressed blouse and oversized sunglasses, barking, "You can't let her scuff up the walkway with those. Wheels, Daniel, we've just had it power washed," as if Sophia were some kind of pollutant staining her perfect world. Daniel tried to ignore her, tried to keep his calm lawyer's demeanor, but Sophia's shoulders hunched and her little hands gripped the armrests of her chair, her eyes shimmering with the kind of shame no child should ever feel, and Daniel felt a flicker of rage in his chest, though he pushed it down, reminding himself not to give Patricia the satisfaction, but Patricia wasn't. Done. By the time they reached the park, she had marched after them, clutching her phone, snapping pictures of the wheelchair tracks in the dust like they were evidence of a crime, muttering loudly to no one in particular, "This is why our property values are plummeting." And though no neighbor dared to intervene, Daniel could see curtains twitching, eyes watching but lips sealed, and he realized in that moment that Patricia thrived not only on her cruelty, but also on the cowardice of those around her. Later that week, things escalated again when Daniel arrived home from work to find that someone had dumped a pile of garbage bags across his driveway, reeking of rotting food and flies, and when he confronted Patricia, who stood smugly watering her flowers just a few feet away, she shrugged and said, "Maybe if certain people respected community standards, they wouldn't attract trash," her voice dripping with insinuation, and though Daniel could have argued, could have threatened her with legal action, he chose instead to clear the bags in silence because Sophia was watching from the window, and he didn't want her to see how close her father was to losing control. But Patricia's cruelty wasn't confined to petty harassment. Soon it turned directly on Sophia herself, like the afternoon when Sophia was sketching in her notebook by the sidewalk and Patricia stormed over, pointing at the colored pencils scattered near the curb, shouting, "Pick those up! You're making the neighborhood look like a junkyard." Her voice so sharp that Sophia froze, tears filling her eyes as she whispered, "I'm sorry," and tried to gather the pencils with trembling hands while Patricia loomed above her, sneering, "Maybe if you didn't need that chair, you wouldn't be such a burden." Words so venomous that Daniel, who had just stepped outside, felt his knees go weak with shock. He rushed to his daughter's side, his hands shaking as he collected the pencils for her, glaring up at Patricia with a quiet fury that scared even him. But Patricia only smirked and said, "Don't give me that look. Counselor, I know how to play by the rules better than you think," before striding away as if she had won some twisted victory. That night, Sophia cried herself to sleep in Daniel's arms, whispering that maybe they should move, that maybe she didn't belong there, and Daniel felt something inside him fracture because no parent should ever have to see their child doubt her own worth, especially not because of a woman who saw cruelty as sport. And though he tried to reassure Sophia, tried to promise her that things would get better, he knew deep down that Patricia wasn't finished. This was just the beginning, the first strike of hatred. And like a storm gathering at sea, her malice was building momentum, preparing to break in a wave so violent that it would change their lives forever. It was on a stormy Thursday afternoon that my world tilted into chaos, for Lily, who always returned home by 4 after school, did not appear at the door, and panic clawed at my chest as minutes stretched into hours, the rain pounding against the windows like the beating of my own frantic heart, and I called every neighbor, every friend, even the school, but no one knew where she was, though some hesitated too long before answering. Their voices strained, as if they knew more than they dared say. And it was then that I noticed the faint flicker of light in Karen's garage, a place I had never seen open, its heavy door always shut tight. And though I had no proof, a father's instinct screamed the unthinkable, and when I confronted her at her front door, dripping wet from the storm, demanding to know where my daughter was, Karen's lips curved into a chilling smile as she replied, "Maybe if you'd kept her under control, she wouldn't have gotten herself into trouble before slamming." the door in my face, and my blood boiled, my fists pounding against the wood. But the law was useless. The police dismissing my pleas with talk of miscommunication and runaway behavior, clearly influenced by Karen's pristine reputation. And as hours became a night of torment, I wandered the neighborhood searching until finally, through a narrow crack in the garage's side window, I glimpsed what shattered my soul: Lily, pale and trembling, slumped against a pile of boxes, her wheelchair shoved aside, her tiny hands clutching her stomach as if in pain, her lips moving silently in a prayer I couldn't hear. And though I wanted to break down the door, though every fiber of me screamed to tear Karen's house apart to free her, I forced myself to retreat into the shadows, because this battle could not be fought with brute force alone. No, it required strategy, patience, and the full measure of power I had long kept hidden. And as the storm raged above me, I vowed that Karen would regret every second of cruelty she had inflicted, for she had no idea that she had just awakened a sleeping giant. For the next 2 days, I watched helplessly as Karen's cruelty unfolded, sneaking glimpses through the cracks of her garage when she thought no one was watching, and what I saw twisted my stomach with rage and sorrow. My daughter being denied food, her pleas met with cruel laughter as Karen sneered, "Maybe hunger will teach you discipline," tossing a bottle of water just out of Lily's reach, forcing her to crawl weakly across the cold concrete for a single sip. And though I called the authorities again and again, each time they dismissed me, claiming Karen was a pillar of the community and that my accusations were baseless, leaving me trapped in a nightmare where justice itself seemed blind. And I could hear Lily's muffled cries through the walls at night, begging for me, her voice so faint I wondered how much longer her fragile body could endure. And Karen, intoxicated with her own power, paraded around the neighborhood with smug satisfaction, spreading lies that Lily had been sent to a special program for troubled children, manipulating the neighbors with her poisonous charm. And though some looked skeptical, none dared challenge her authority, not even when I pleaded for their help. But still I waited, gathering every shred of evidence, every whispered rumor, every fleeting glimpse of Karen's twisted cruelty. And though my hands shook with the urge to storm her house and end it all, I knew the time was not yet right. Because to truly destroy Karen, I needed more than emotion. I needed absolute, undeniable proof, the kind that would not only free my daughter but also strip Karen of every ounce of power she wielded. And as I hid in the shadows, my heart breaking with each moment Lily went unfed, I made a silent promise to her. Hold on just a little longer, my angel, because soon, very soon, the world will see Karen for what she truly is, and when that day comes, she will pay a price far greater than hunger. The truth was, I was not the struggling single father everyone believed me to be, for behind the modest home, the simple clothes, and the quiet lifestyle lay an empire worth billions, a legacy built on innovation, power, and influence. Yet, after Lily's birth, after her disability, made me realize how fragile life truly was. I had abandoned the boardrooms and the mansions, choosing instead to give her a life free from the corruption and greed that had consumed me. But in hiding who I was, I had underestimated monsters like Karen, and now the mask I had worn for so long was becoming my greatest weapon, because as I quietly activated old contacts, as I made discreet calls to private investigators and lawyers who owed me favors, the pieces began to fall into place, and every shred of evidence against Karen was documented, every cruel word, every hidden camera recording, every financial fraud within the HOA books she thought no one would ever uncover. And the deeper we dug, the uglier the truth became. She had embezzled funds, silenced whistleblowers, and destroyed families who dared resist her, all while presenting herself as the perfect suburban leader. And though my blood boiled with rage at each revelation, I felt a grim satisfaction building within me, because soon the mask would come off, and the neighborhood would see that beneath my quiet exterior stood a man with resources Karen couldn't begin to fathom. And though she believed she had the upper hand, believing I was powerless, believing Lily was helpless, the reality was that I had been waiting, preparing, and when the storm finally broke, it would not just be Karen's reign that ended, it would be her entire world collapsing around her, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the ruins of her arrogance. The breaking point came on the fourth day, When I discovered Lily's condition had worsened to the brink of collapse, her body frail, her voice barely audible as she whispered for me, and something inside me snapped, shattering the chains of patience I had forced upon myself. For no longer could I endure her suffering while Karen basked in smug triumph, and so I set the plan into motion, unleashing the full scope of my resources in a single decisive strike as security teams I once commanded in. My corporate empire quietly surrounded the neighborhood, drones capturing every angle of Karen's garage, live feeds transmitting to legal teams and media contacts ready to expose the truth, and with the weight of evidence undeniable, I confronted Karen at an HOA meeting she had smugly called to shame me for noncompliance, walking into the crowded clubhouse with the calm of a man who had already won, and when she sneered at me, mocking my pathetic excuses, I let the silence hang for just long enough before projecting the live footage onto the wall, the entire room gasping as they saw Lily weak and starving, imprisoned in Karen's garage, her frail hands reaching out in desperation, and Karen's face drained of color. Her mouth opening but no words coming out, for the illusion of control had shattered in an instant, and as the neighbors recoiled in horror, as the police finally scrambled to act now that the world was watching, I stepped forward, my voice steady but laced with fury, and said, "You thought you were untouchable, Karen, but you forgot one thing. I'm not the man you think I am." And when I revealed the truth of who I was, the billionaire she had dismissed as ordinary, the shockwave rippled through the crowd, leaving Karen trembling, stripped of her power, her empire of lies crumbling before her very eyes. What followed was a storm of justice unlike anything Willow Creek had ever seen, for once the footage spread, once the truth of Karen's cruelty and corruption was laid bare for the world, her empire collapsed overnight, the HOA disbanded, her accounts frozen, her home seized as investigators uncovered years of fraud. And though she begged, though she cried and claimed she had only been trying to enforce order, no one listened, not the neighbors who now turned on her with righteous fury, not the authorities who dragged her away in handcuffs, not even her own family who disowned her in shame. And as she disappeared into the shadows of a prison cell, I turned my attention to Lily, who, though weak, began her recovery surrounded by the best doctors, therapists, and caregivers money could buy, and slowly her smile returned, her laughter once again filling the home with warmth. And when she asked me why I had hidden who I truly was, why I had pretended to be ordinary all these years, I told her the truth, that I wanted her to grow up knowing love, not wealth, humility, not arrogance, but that sometimes the world left us no choice but to reveal the full extent of our strength. And as we sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over a neighborhood finally free from Karen's tyranny, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years, knowing I had not only saved my daughter, but also given justice to every family Karen had ever hurt. And though I could have walked away, returned to my empire, I chose to stay, to rebuild this place into a true community where no child would ever suffer again. And with Lily by my side, her spirit unbroken, her smile brighter than ever, I whispered a final vow into the evening air. Never again would I let the monsters of this world believe they could prey on the innocent, for they would never know when the ordinary man before them was, in fact, the billionaire who would stop at nothing to protect his own.